Francis was not having a good day, and that might be because it was the middle of the night. The year was 1814. Francis had gone aboard a British warship in order to negotiate the return of his friend who had been taken captive, and he was successful in that. Francis was an American. It was the War of 1812, and the British Armada is going up and down the American coastline, blasting and tearing down anything that they could find. Unfortunately for Francis, while on board the British vessel, he found out about an impending attack on an American fort. And so the British didn't let him go and warn the Americans. So he's stuck out in the harbor, watching on as the British Armada unleashes a torrent of fire and shot on American Fort McHenry. And night is coming, and the last thing that Francis sees over the prow of the ship is the American flag flying over the battlements of a fort doomed to be destroyed. And night comes, and it's not the night of electric lights, and there's no one inside the fort posting on Twitter or Facebook about how things are going. Certainly, no one can survive that. And through that long and dark night, Francis is anticipating, come morning, come first light, whose flag will be flying. Now, you might recognize the story because Francis, his full name is Francis Scott Key, and he immortalized his experience that night through a poem called The Battle at Fort McHenry. And the first stanza, or first verse of that poem is now known as the Star-Spangled Banner. It is the American national anthem, and we sing it at every award ceremony and sports game, and when an American wins the gold medal at the Olympics, they play it. But it's an interesting thing, this song, because while it had a historic reference back in the day, at least the first verse has been transposed into something that is always applicable to all Americans for all time. All right, anytime someone stands up to sing the national anthem, we are inviting ourselves to view us as if standing in darkness looking for light to come. Because the song ends on a question. And surprisingly, it's hard to quote the lines of a song and not sing it, but I'm going to do my best this morning. All right. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Hey, it's early morning, light is coming, I can't see it yet. Can you? Can you see what we saw last night right before the sun went down? The flag flying. Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night o'er the rampart we watch were so gallantly streaming? Which flag is flying? And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. The only information we had is the fact that the fighting has not yet stopped. It means someone is still living, fighting back in that fort. So, oh say, does that star-spangled banner still wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? It's a question. And every time we sing this song, we're asking the question, dear Americans, does our flag still fly? It's a call, it's a summons to hope for those who are in darkness, who do not yet know how things will end. And don't get me wrong, I'm a very proud American. And as best I can figure at this present moment, without being in a life or death situation, I would gladly give my life for my country. America is a very good thing, but it's not an ultimate thing. And my ultimate hope does not rest in the American military, it doesn't rest in the American economy, and it doesn't rest in the American government. Okay, America cannot save me, ultimately. It can't actually lead me out of full darkness. All right? As a country, we have blood on our hands, we have broken treaties, particularly with Native Americans. We're far from perfect. Our government is far from perfect. Our economy is far from perfect. Like, it won't save me, but it's a good thing. And yet, I want to use this idea of a song that summons people to hope in something beyond themselves, that summons people to light beyond our present darkness. Because long before Francis Scott Key penned those words, a guy named Moses gave a song to the Israelites to remember God by. For when Israel would find themselves in times of darkness and they needed a message and they needed hope of what in the world is God doing. And I think for us as Family of Grace, I think we need hope too, because this world is a scary, scary place. Frankly, some of us with kids, our houses are scary, scary places too. And whether it's relationally, whether it's in your career, whether it's, it's with your health, I don't know what's going on, but most of us could use hope, and Moses offers it to us today, along with a very sober confrontation. We are coming to the end of the Torah. We started in Genesis in the Garden of Eden. We are ending today, Deuteronomy chapters 31 through 34, at the death of Moses in the hope of entry into the promised land for the people of Israel. And yet, the Bible describes life as it is, and it is a very mixed message, because while Israel is on the verge of something so good, they are also receiving the message that really it doesn't matter, because this whole project is doomed from the very start, because the human heart is hard and the people are going to refuse to listen. So I'm going to summarize chapters 31 through 34, and we're going to dive into chapter 32 this morning. All right, so that's going to be really the text. So just to summarize how this whole story ends, Moses has been talking for most of the book of Deuteronomy. It's been a lot of speeches. I'm sure you guys know it. It's been hard to hear. Stories are innately more interesting to us. At this point, we are reminded that Moses is going to die. And what happens when the leader who's been leading the people of Israel around for 40 years is gone? What happens when the guy who could actually go and talk to God and bring back a message to answer whatever question you had is no longer around? And chapter 31 answers that. When Moses is gone, we're given a new leader in Joshua, and we're given a book, the scriptures, or the Torah. And so Moses writes it down. So when you go through chapter 31, you just alternate. Joshua, written Torah. Joshua, a written song. Joshua, written Torah for the people. Chapter 32 is a song to remember God by. Chapter 33 echoes what Jacob did in the book of Genesis at the end of his life, how he blessed his 12 sons. Moses now at the end of his life blesses the 12 tribes of Israel. And then chapter 34 culminates in the story of how Moses died, where he was buried, no one really knows, and the fact that at whatever distant point, all the Bible as we currently have it was compiled and the final edit was put on. The person says, and to this day we've not yet seen that prophet like Moses to come, whom Yahweh knew face to face, who performed signs and wonders. We're still waiting for a prophet who's intimate with God, who performs signs and wonders, and who's going to bring God's next revelation to us. And so that's where the Torah ends, with this future hope that God's future work is still going to come about. But let's go to chapter 32, and just to let you know what this song is about, I'm going to start in chapter 31, verse 16, where it says, Yahweh said to Moses, all right, Moses, you're going to rest with your ancestors. It means he's going to die. All right, and these people will soon prostitute themselves to the foreign gods of the land that they're entering. All right, God describes his relationship with the people of Israel similarly to that between a man and his wife. And when these people go worship another god, they are cheating on the God who created heaven and earth. Yahweh says they're going to forsake me, they're going to break the covenant I made with them, and in that day, I'm going to become angry with them, and I'm going to forsake them. All right, thus far, God has already told Joshua, I will never forsake you, but here God says, because they forsake me, I'll forsake them. I will hide my face from them, and they will be destroyed. And many disasters and calamities will come on them, and in that day they're going to ask, have not these disasters come on us because our God is not with us? And I will certainly hide my face in that day because of all their wickedness in turning to other gods. So now write this song and teach it to the Israelites and have them sing it, so that it may be a witness for me against them. And when I've brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, the land I promised on oath to their ancestors, when they eat their fill and they thrive, they're going to turn to other gods. They're going to worship them. They're going to reject me. They're going to break my covenant. And when many disasters and calamities come on them, this song will testify against them, because it will not be forgotten by their descendants. I know what they're disposed to do, even before I bring them into the land that I promised them on oath. And so Moses wrote down this song that day and taught it to the Israelites. All right, a few millennia before modern brain science told us that people with Alzheimer's and dementia who cannot remember their own spouse's names can still remember the songs they learned as kids. All right, God had this figured out. Teach them a song. Why? So that hundreds of years from now, when their descendants who have completely abandoned me find themselves suffering in exile, having lost everything. All right? They've lost their land. They've lost the temple and their chance to be made right with God. They've lost their language. They've lost their homes. They've been conquered. They have suffered famine and rejection. And now they're slaved in a foreign land by a bunch of people who hate them. When all these terrible things have happened, they're going to think, God's just not even with us. He's not a factor to be considered. And at that point, their childhood nursery rhyme, or however this got passed down, is going to pop into their heads and actually tell them the message that God had prepared for them to remember. So we're going to pick up in chapter 32, verse 1. Listen, you heavens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the words of my mouth. Moses isn't even talking to the Israelites present right now. At this point, he's summoning creation that God made back in the beginning. Listen up, sky, listen up, land, and let my teaching fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. See Moses' words, they'll bring life. I'm going to proclaim the name of Yahweh. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. So anytime for the rest of the Bible, when you read God is a rock, that analogy starts right here. He is a rock. His works are perfect. All his ways are just. He is a faithful God who does no wrong. Upright and just is he. All right? He's immovable. He's dependable. He's radiant. Like he's trustworthy and steadfast. And everything he does, you can look at and go, oh man, that's just perfectly done. But they are corrupt and they're not really his kids. To their shame, they're a warped and a crooked generation. God is just, he's true, everything he does is good, and the people of Israel who reflect him are just nothing like him. He's straight and they're all crooked. See, is this the way that you repay Yahweh? You foolish and unwise people. Is he not your father, your creator, who made you and formed you? Like after everything he's done for you, this is how you're going to repay him. So remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father, and he will tell you. Your elders, they'll explain to you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up all mankind, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. All right, some of you are reading Bibles that says the sons of Israel. Some of you are reading Bibles that say according to the heavenly court or the spiritual beings. All right, the phrase son of God for thousands of years has been debated. Either we're comparing the fact that the 70 nations in Genesis 10, all right, this is how humanity was divided up, is equal to the number of Israelites who went down into Egypt, so 70 and 70. That's how one group has interpreted it. And the other group says, no, sons of God actually refers to spiritual beings out there, which has other scriptures to back it. The idea that God gave the nations over to these other spiritual powers. And I'm more inclined to that second one, personally. Either way we go, the startling thing is verse 9, for Yahweh's portion is his people, Jacob is his allotted inheritance. It means that God chose the people of Israel. It wasn't because they were the best, they weren't the brightest, they weren't the sharpest crayon, in the box, and they were definitely several french fries short of a Happy Meal, okay? What made Israel special was the fact that God chose them and said, you will be mine. Verse 10, see, in a desert land he found him, and in a barren and howling waste. He shielded him, and he cared for him, and he guarded him as the apple of his eye, or as the pupil, the dark area in his eye. The Hebrew idiom reflects the idea of like the little man in his eye. So like, Trevor, if I'm looking at you, I'm not going to do it this morning because I have to get really close to you. But if I got so close that I could see my own reflection in the dark area of your eye, we have an idea like this is how God is taking care of Israel. He is intimate with them. He is taking care of them. He is bringing them close and looking after them. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young, that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them aloft. Yahweh alone led him. No foreign god was with him. All right, Israel, you are saved because Yahweh has led you. He had no one helping him. There was no foreign god that took an interest in you. No one else cared about you. It was Yahweh, and it was Yahweh alone. See, he made him ride on the heights of the land, and he fed him with the fruit of the fields. He nourished him with honey from the rock and with oil from the flinty crag. All right, it's a song. It's poetry, and so we're using some fun pictures here. All right, God's traveling with the Israelites through the wilderness and giving them water from a rock and manna in the desert is being described as honey or oil from flinty crags. And the idea is like life and abundance has sprung up from when there should be nothing. So, with curd, and then the story continues, with curds and milk from herd and flock, with the fattened lambs of goats, with choice rams of Bashan. All right, so now we're describing what God has done for the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan River. And the finest kernels of wheat, you drank the foaming blood of the grape. At this point, we're anticipating life in the promised land itself, abundance, joy, and food from God. And then Israel, they drank wine and presumably maybe got drunk. Because in verse 15 it says, Jeshurun grew fat and he kicked. All right, Jeshurun, it's a pet name for Israel. The word is a play on Jacob, and it means the upright one. Which is so ironic because we've already been told these people are crooked as all get out. So the upright one, they grew fat and kicked. Sorry, one more thing. In America, fat means like bloated, and it has this bad connotation. All right, this is fat like, as I heard one British comedian from Africa, he says, in Africa, fat's good. We look at someone who's fat and we say, where did you get the food? Like it's a real positive thing, all right? This is a positive image. Israel is fat, they kicked, they filled with food, they became heavy and sleek, and when they had it all, they abandoned the God who made them. And they rejected the rock, their Savior. And they made him jealous with their foreign gods and angered him with their detestable idols, their crap gods who could do nothing. They sacrificed to false gods, which are not God, gods they had not known, gods that recently appeared, gods your ancestors did not fear. You deserted the rock who fathered you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. All right, parenting, father and mother imagery used here. You looked at God, and then you went, yeah, I can do better. And you left. And so Yahweh saw this, and he rejected them. Because he was angered by his sons and his daughters. He says, I'm going to hide my face from them. And I'm going to see what their end will be, because they're a perverse generation, children who are unfaithful. I had a friend who said when he was in high school, he really screwed up. Like, he really screwed up. And his mom had to come and take care of the situation. And after his mom found out about what he had done, they were sitting on a bench, and his mom is just seething. Not in like loud anger, but in the far more dangerous, quiet anger. And his mom like looked over at him, and then she just jerked her head. Like she's too angry to even look at him. She turned her face away. That's what God is doing to his people Israel here. And like a parent whose children are making the most terrible choices with addictive substances, eventually get to the place where they say, you just need to go, and as long as this is in your life, you can't be here. Go, do whatever you want. God is sending Israel out to see what their end will be. What will be the course their life is going to take? Because God says, they've made me jealous by what is no God. They've angered me with their worthless idols. So therefore, I'm going to make them jealous, envious by those who are no people, not a people. I'm going to make them angry by a nation that has no understanding, a worthless nation. For a fire is going to be kindled by my wrath, one that burns down to the realm of the dead below. It will devour the earth and its harvest and set afire the foundations of the mountains. All right, this is an anti-flood. Once upon a time, long ago, God's anger at the destruction and sin and brokenness that humans were bringing into the world caused a flood that started from the ground and went up. At this point, we have its inverse. God is going to start with a fire that's going to start from the top and go down. And God says, I'm going to heap calamities on them. I'm going to spend my arrows against them. I'm going to send wasting famine against them. Okay, the God that gave them like honey and oil out of rock, or the most inhospitable, barren ground you can imagine, God could bring abundance out of that, but now he's just taking the food away from them. And consuming pestilence and deadly plague. I'm going to send against them the fangs of wild beasts and the venom of vipers that glide in the dust. Oh, this is a really bad image. If you guys remember all the way back in the book of Genesis, there was an enemy of God and his people in the garden. There was a serpent who tricked Adam and Eve into turning away from God and abandoning him and all the consequences that came upon humanity. And from that time, there were two different lines that were being traced through humanity, the sons of God and the sons of the serpent. And here God is saying, if you're going to act like the serpent, I'm going to send the serpent against you. And in the street, the sword is going to make them childless. Oh, the irony that the children who abandon their parents are going to lose their own kids. In their homes, terror will reign. Yahweh was going to be your king, but now fear will rule you. And the young men and the young women will perish, the infants and those with gray hair. God says, I said I would scatter them and I would erase their name from human memory. I'm so angry, I just was going to be done with these people, but I dreaded the taunts of the enemy, lest the adversary misunderstand and say, our hand has triumphed, Yahweh has not done all this. So for people of Israel, hundreds of years from now, who find themselves in exile wondering, what is God's game plan? Here's the message. God says, what you deserve is to be totally wiped out. But I'm not going to do that. Lest the enemy, the adversary, misunderstand. Is this a spiritual enemy of God, or are these physical, like Gentiles or foreign nations? Either way, God has a reputation to establish. And he says they need to know that it wasn't them who did it. Because Israel, they're a nation without sense. There's no discernment in them. If only they were wise and they would understand this and discern what their end will be. How could one man chase 1,000 or two put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them, unless Yahweh had given them up? All right, Israel, just look around. What has happened to you is impossible unless I give you up. You who have abandoned me are just suffering the consequences of it. Because your enemies, their rock is not like our rock. Even our enemies concede. Okay, God is totally different. Israel, their vine comes from the vine of Sodom and from the fields of Gomorrah. Their grapes are filled with poison and their clusters with bitterness. Their wine is the venom of serpents and the deadly poison of cobras. All right, the life of God's people is described as like, man, these guys have been screwed up and corrupt from the very beginning. All right, their life, their source, it comes from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which if you're not familiar with it, are like the worst people in existence at that time. All right, Israel has been screwed up from the beginning. And then the fruit that they bore, this, using an agricultural image here, like this vine started in injustice and immorality, and then grew up to bear poisonous fruit that then was matured into the wine of snake venom. At this point, God's children are actually being described as children of the devil, really. You sons of the serpent, you bunch of baby snakes, you are nothing like your God. In fact, you are the antithesis. You are the very opposite. So what is God going to do? He says, have I not kept this in reserve and sealed it in my vaults? I have a secret you don't know about yet. It is mine to avenge. I will repay. In due time their foot will slip, their day of disaster is near, and their doom rushes upon them. God says, you thought I was like you thought I would do nothing about all of this. You were wrong. One day I'm showing up, and I'm going to deal with this. Vengeance belongs to me. I'm going to pay it all back. The surprise comes starting in verse 36. It says, Yahweh will vindicate his people and relent concerning his servants when he sees that their strength is gone and no one is left slave or free. We're introduced to a second group of people here. All right, within broader Israel, there is a group of the faithful. There's a group of people who are described as servants of Yahweh, and when Yahweh shows up, he's going to vindicate them. So Israel broadly, who has turned away from them, is going to be judged, but God is coming to also save those among Israel. He's bringing judgment and he's bringing justice, which is going to be really good news for some, and really terrible news for others. But he's waiting. He's waiting until their strength is gone and no one is left slave or free, until all options have been expended and tried and found wanting. And at the end of the day, when no one is left and everyone has had their shot and failed, he's going to show up and he's going to say, now where are their gods? The rock they took refuge in. The gods who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offerings. Let them rise up to help you. Let them give you shelter. You who abandoned me, you thought you could do elsewhere, and now God is showing up and saying, all right, you guys sure look like you're in a pickle. Where are those people that you said were going to come save you? Where are those people that you trusted? Where are those spiritual beings that you thought were more powerful than me? Huh? I don't see them around. I imagine God at this point not only staring across earth, but also into heaven and saying, any of you up here? Who's saving my people? And then he goes, so see now that I myself am he. There is no God besides me. I have no rival. I have no peer. No one is my equal. No one is a threat to me. There is no one. I put to death and I bring to life. I resurrect the dead. I have wounded and I will heal. And no one can deliver out of my hand. I lift my hand to heaven and I solemnly swear, as surely as I live forever, because, when we make an oath, we always swear by something greater than ourselves. And when God makes an oath, he doesn't have any other option, so he just swears by himself. When I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand grasps it in judgment, I will take vengeance on my adversaries. I will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood while my sword devours flesh, the blood of the slain and the captives, the heads of the enemy leaders rejoice. Through that last word and rejoice from verse 33, because this is good news. This is good news to people who find themselves in darkness, wondering, will dawn ever break? What is the answer to all the afflictions that we find ourselves in? What is our hope? And the hope is that God has judged you, but he's not done with you yet. He has punished, but he will one day heal. He will one day come to rescue you. He will one day come to vindicate you who belong to him. And one day your enemies are going to get it. Because no one can deliver out of his hand. He has no rival. He has no peer. He is all by himself. And so rejoice, you nations, with his people. And some of your Bibles will read, bow down to him, all gods. There's a long side note on this last verse. The short version goes like this. That according to the Hebrew text most Bibles use, that we have from around 1000 AD, this last verse is 4 lines long. According to the old text of the Greek Bible and what Paul quoted in the book of Romans, and according to what we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so Hebrew texts found about 70 years ago that predate by 1,000 years our other Jewish manuscripts, this verse is 8 lines long, and it includes a reference to the heavenly beings and a call for all God's angels to worship him and all gods to bow down. So, rejoice, you nations, with his people. Bow down to him, all gods. He will avenge the blood of his servants. He will take vengeance on his enemies. He will make atonement for his land and his people. Rejoice. This is the hope for those in darkness. This is what people who find themselves in exile need to remember. That everything that they're suffering is because they have turned away from God and they've abandoned him. And yes, they deserve to be wiped out. But God isn't done with them yet because he has his own agenda. He has a reputation to protect. And the answer is one day he's going to do it himself. No one else can save. No other God can show up. He is coming to avenge the blood of his servants, those who have died for the sake of this broken world. He will bring vengeance on his enemies. And the great conflict of the Bible so far, how does atonement for sin, how does the brokenness that humanity has brought into the world get dealt with so that we can live forever with God in his house, how can atonement actually be made once and for all? God is going to have to do it. And he's going to do it for his land, and he's going to do it for his people. And so the big thrust of this whole passage is that we would remember and that we would see and acknowledge that Yahweh is God and there is no one like him. Or if I was going to quote the prophet Isaiah, I could summarize it like this: one day, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess in heaven and on earth and under the earth that Yahweh is Lord. Or as a distant servant will one day say, that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father. Because he's bringing atonement and he's bringing vengeance. And 1,000+ years after these lines were penned, God himself showed up to take matters into his own hands. And he was born as a human being, and he lived a perfect life, and he willingly died and gave his life to make atonement for the sins of the world. And Jesus was buried and dead, and that was game over until God, who puts to death, also brought to life. And Yahweh vindicated his servant who gave his life for the sins of the whole world. And everyone who acknowledges that looks on and says, wow, salvation alone belongs to Yahweh. There is no other. And one day, Jesus will show up in judgment, and all the brokenness of our world will be taken care of. All right? Every broken contract, every broken treaty, every act of violence and persecution and prejudice, all will face justice when Jesus returns. Because one day, there will just not be an option anymore for argument. Because the world will run dry of all available options, okay? Both on an earthly level and on a spiritual level. No one else will save, and then God will show up and say, did you really think that you could do this without me? And one day everyone would just come and would just have to admit what is abundantly and factually true, that Yahweh is God. There is no one else. And he is rescued and saved in Jesus Christ, and everyone will see this as true. This is a song to remember God by. This is something to spur our memories when we are hurting and when we are in darkness. That we serve God and there is no other. And so, family of grace, I just want to call us to remember that. I want to give us eyes to see him this morning, because without him, we really have no hope. See, someone crashed into my peaceful existence one day with such an innocent question, but they asked me, they said, how bad would things have to get before you would ever consider leaving the United States? I wasn't ready for a question like that. What do you mean? What do you mean that things could get so bad that I would have to flee the United States? And they just pointed to some historical examples. You know, no one expected in 1929 that Germany would be a really bad place to be Jewish within 15 years. No one expected before the 1990s that being I don't know if it's the Hutus or the Tutsis in Rwanda in the 90s would be like a horrific place. America, for all its goodness, is fallible. It could be overthrown within my own lifetime. God forbid. I truly, I don't want that to happen. But America can't save us. Not ultimately. My career cannot save me. Not ultimately. I mean, I've known guys who have had some of the most rock solid, steady careers. You think you could just take that to the bank, and then lo and behold, a financial recession hit that no one was looking for. And rather than laying off all the low people, they decided to cut some key upper management who had been with the company for 35 years. And you lost your job. And now what? If a relationship is what's going to save you, what happens when the person dies or cheats on you or leaves you? Where is our hope? What thing do we say, without this, I cannot live? Is it retirement? I mean, people were committing suicide in the recession because they had lost their life savings, the things that they were depending on. At the end of the day, like anything that we trust in this world can fail us. It won't save. But long ago, there was a bunch of people who figured things out. All right? And the people, sorry, that's a bad way to introduce it. Let me try this again. But a hope that is not found, that's cannot be answered in this present world, is something that can never be taken from us. All right, the hope here that one day God is going to act and he will decidedly bring justice into human life, like this is a hope that can sustain us no matter what happens to us. See, sometimes we forget as Western Americans that Christianity historically is the religion of oppressed minorities. Even today in our world, the most likely candidate to be a Christian is a black female. And African American slaves found their hope in the gospel of Jesus. That despite the fact that life and liberty could be taken from them, God is bringing justice, and he's going to show up one day. It's like that point when you're in a really terrible job, but you get to go on vacation tomorrow, or tomorrow you start a brand new job that's going to pay you twice what you're making now with 3 times the vacation pay. Like, you know, today is terrible. Sure, today is really, really terrible, but because of what is coming tomorrow, I can live differently today. Because I have a hope for what God is going to bring in human history, whatever it is, we can live today, and we don't have to be thrown terribly by all the realities of our life. So I mean, apply this as you will. This affects everything. Like, just what does it mean to see that Yahweh is God? Here's one example of what it means. Oh, family of grace, could we, as Jesus followers, keep our head in the next 16 months before the presidential election? Could we? Could we say that no matter what someone believes or votes, like if they're a Jesus follower or their family, we're not going to cut them out? It doesn't mean that this stuff isn't important. It's very important. Please be responsible civic citizens. Vote. Get out there. Talk to one another. Things like this. But again, our hope is not in whoever's going to be in the White House. It's not on the Republican or the Democratic parties. It's not in the Senate or the House, or whether or not we'll ever get a speaker again. I don't know. It's not in if we can pass a budget to keep the government open. Our hope is in Jesus. And so again, like, our hope not be in America. Like, it's just one particular application that is finding, like, I'm not, politics matters. It's just not the ultimate thing. Jesus, God, he is the ultimate thing, and he is the one that I'm trusting. I've got people a block and a half from here doing things that will kill them because they know that one day everyone has to die, so you might as well do what makes you feel good. And if there's no hope, if God is not bringing justice to the world, all right, if the dead stay dead, then I think they're right. But they're not. And because of the hope of Jesus Christ, because of the hope in the resurrection of the dead, that means that everything that we do matters. All right? If God is God and there is no God besides him, then anything we look to for satisfaction and ultimate hope will ultimately fail us. So guys, I just want to welcome you to believe the gospel, to remember what God has done, to acknowledge him and to rejoice because he's coming one day to save and to answer all the things that will happen. And the unfortunate thing is that waiting is really hard. And I don't know how long it will be. The Israelites suffered 400 years in slavery in Egypt. They suffered, approximately 400, 500 years in exile before Christ came. We, as Christians, have been waiting for 2,000 years for him to return. I don't know how long it's going to be. But I've seen enough that I trust him. And so I'm going to wait for him. I invite you to do the same. Would you pray with me? Father, would you help us to behold you as God? To see that you are the King and there is no one else. To despise the fact that we are constantly tempted to trust in other things and other people all the time. God, may our hope be in you. And would you remind us day in and day out, through your word, through our leaders, through our friends and our neighbors and our family, through all those who call in the name of Jesus, would we remind ourselves that you're the one who's going to save us. And so, Father, may we be involved in the world, but not too wrapped up in it. May we make wise decisions knowing that in the end, you're the one who's going to come and save. May we not be too crushed or too disappointed when our life does not go the way that we thought it would. When our careers take a downturn or our health begins to fail, when our relationships sour and our finances dwindle, when the market seems like it's going to crash and interest rates are on the rise, Lord, whatever it is, we look to you to take care of us and to sustain us. But we have a better hope than this world can offer. And God, many of us have drunk deeply from the wells of pleasure and found that in the end it's just kind of leaves us wanting more. That all our attempts to sate our own cravings just inflame them, that we just want more at the end. So we can never be satisfied because we were not meant to be satisfied with things in this world. We were meant to be satisfied by you. And so God, save us. Send your Son. Bring justice. Bring healing. Turn us to be the kind of people that we should be. But until such a time as that, God, you have begun a good work in us. Would you bring it to completion one day in Christ Jesus? Would you help us to be patient with our own failings and the failings of the people around us? And would you help us to trust you and to wait for your vindication, to wait and hope and trust that you still love us, that you haven't given up. We may have to wait a while. God bless your people.